game just to kind of, get things popping. Okay. So game it's real easy. Let me get my phone so I can have my timer. It's Black Love.
Cool.
Okay. It's really easy. So I'm going to give you a category. I need you to name 5 things in that category in 10 seconds. So, category, 5 things in that category, 10 seconds. Here's the catch. No ums, us, I, so, all those filler words that you do, you can't do that. None of that. Okay, let me get my my stopwatch. I got it. I think that's Dr. Earl Lewis. Do I see her? There, I do see her there. Dr. Earl Lewis, you gonna come and you wanna play with them? We're playing Black Love.
No, I am going to defer to the rising generation.
Okay, I'm taking you out for a second. Let me just do one with them. Okay, I'm gonna take you out for a second. Okay, so the category is.
Sorry, for clarification, are we all, or are we going one at a time?
You just jump in. You get in how you fit in.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You just get in how you fit in. So remember, one category, 5 things in that category, 10 seconds. No ums, us, I, so, no filler words. Y'all ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so your category is hip hop artists. Give me 5 hip hop artists in 10 seconds. Go.
Kendrick Lamar.
Drake.
50 Cent.
Quali.
Lauryn Hill. MC
Okay.
Done.
Wait a minute. Okay, it's like 3 of y'all talking. 2 people just being silent.
I said Quali. Talib Quali.
I said Kendrick Lamar.
50 Cent.
Tashara,
Lauryn
I don't
Hill.
think you said anything. I'm pretty sure you said.
I think she might be frozen.
And she.
Oh,
Oh
is she
yeah.
frozen?
That's what I said too. I was like, wow, being very still. But no, I think she's frozen.
Okay, let me see if I can fix her. I'm gonna take her out and put her back in. Let me see. I think that might have fixed her.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ife Tayo Ojelade. I am the executive director of A Healing Paradigm, and we are based in Muskogee Territory, which is also known as Atlanta, Georgia. And I want to thank you for showing up with us today. I am very excited about the program that we are getting ready to discuss. And I was talking a little bit about my experience in graduate school. So we're looking at this concept of anti-Blackness that shows up in graduate school settings. And we have an amazing group of graduate students and that are professionals in their field, and they have authored a chapter, and they're going to talk about that today. And we're going to have this discussion with 2 amazing women that are going to help facilitate that discussion. But before we jump in, one of the things I want to do is add one of our partners who helped make this possible, Dr. Monique Earl Lewis, who is an associate professor in Africana Studies at Morehouse College. She's also the director of the Center for Faculty Development, Teaching, and Advising. Hey, Dr. Earl Lewis.
Greetings. It is always wonderful to join you, and I am just in awe of these wonderful bright minds that put my heart at ease in terms of thinking about the future of our work. So thank you, scholars, for joining this conversation. And we hope to see more of you in the near future. As we begin today, I just want to begin with intention by acknowledging our ancestors, our foot soldiers, diviners, and prayer warriors, who without them, we would not be. Ashe.
Ashe. All right. Thank
I
you,
bring
Dr.
you greetings. I bring you greetings on behalf of Dr. David A. Thomas, the 12th president of Morehouse College, Dr. Kendrick Brown, provost and senior vice president for academic affairs, and Dr. Clarissa Mark Harris, chair of the Division of Humanities. This is the support team that allows these partnerships between Morehouse College and A Healing Paradigm and the work that you are doing, scholars. I just want to share to our members in the community what we will hear from our graduate scholars today in confronting anti-Black racism is that we will yet be fed again. We will assemble at this table to eat and grow strong. Brother Bailey, Sister Harris, Sister Hall, Brother Krueger, Sister Williams, each has combined their research and their lived experiences and will share responses to academic and social anti-Blackness, the anti-Blackness experience of graduate school, and what it means to be young, gifted, and Black in the academy. There's an African proverb that says, not to know is bad. Not to wish to know is worse. With that in mind, for today's conversation, we will be guided with a new cachet of wisdom warriors. And again, you are here, they are here. We are here together this day to understand, confront, combat, and construct healing for ourselves and our communities as people of African descent. We again gather at table, this virtual table, for if there is no enemy within, then the enemy without can do us no harm. Ashe, and thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Earl Lewis. I always think that it's important to honor the connections that we have within the community. And Dr. Earl Lewis has been a great partner in being able to ensure that the history, life, and culture of people of African descent can be disseminated on a larger scale. So I want to thank her again for partnering with us. Now, I have been out of graduate school for quite a minute. So I think that I don't need to be in this conversation. I think this conversation needs to be led by those that are having the experience currently, that are thought leaders that can help us move forward. And that is why I have asked two amazing sisters to facilitate this conversation today. It is soon to be Dr. Keoshia Harris and soon to be Tashara Williams, who will facilitate this conversation. And I am going to get out of the way. So take it over, ladies.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ife. Okay, so for the people who are viewing, we just wanted to provide an overview of what you can expect from this talk today. There's basically three main things that we are going to cover and ask questions related or ask questions to the authors. So the first thing that we're going to cover is what is the meaning and the overall message that the authors wanted from their particular chapter. Then the second thing we're going to ask questions related to are what are the author's personal experiences and how this has helped shape the chapter that they created. And then the last thing is we want to leave the audience with a hopeful message, an optimistic message, and we really want to ask questions related to what are some of the hopes that the authors have for the future generation, and if there's any like last messages that they really want people to have and to feel when they read their chapter. So with that, I will start with the first question here. And so with your particular chapter, titles mean a lot. They can mean a lot of different things. They have a lot of different meaning. And so the chapter or the title of your chapter is Unsung, Underpaid, and Unafraid. And that is a powerful title. And so could you talk a little bit more about how this title kind of came about and what inspired it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to jump in here. So good morning from the West Coast. I'm here in San Francisco. So everybody tuning in, and to my co-authors and Keoshia, it's good to see you. Tashara, I'm glad you're with us. So I'm happy to kind of feel into a little bit of what inspired the title of this chapter. And I think a little bit about kind of the like unique positionality of Black graduate students. So graduate students already are kind of occupy, I think, a unique position in higher education. So as students, oftentimes as staff, and also as content experts who are producing knowledge for the university, and also oftentimes as funding sources. So the prestige of a university, the ranking, a lot of that comes from the research that's produced by graduate students. And so grad students, I think, are uniquely positioned to maintain relationships like with undergraduates, staff, faculty, administration, and kind of liaise between these groups. And so there's a critical function being served by graduate students. Black graduate students in particular, I think, are expected oftentimes to lead these kinds of like institutional activist efforts, serve on diversity committees, be mentors to undergraduate students of color, et cetera. So there's this extra expectation. And at the same time, we rarely hear about these efforts. So that's where the unsung piece of the title comes from. That kind of expectation to shoulder the additional responsibility and without sort of being supported in basic needs or basic kind of financial support. So that's where the idea for unsung came. Underpaid. So I think, yeah, you see me laughing a little bit because just being a student in general, undergraduate, graduate, we have a big problem, a larger kind of macro level problem in terms of funding in higher education to make it through. And being a graduate student means being a student for longer, anywhere from 2 to 6 years. And even students who receive fellowship or scholarship aren't funded at a living wage. So loans are an inevitability. And so you couple that with the fact that Black students have higher debt burdens, lower annual earnings than not only white peers, but there's non-Black peers in general. So that puts Black students, graduate students, at a particular disadvantage. And then I also think about sort of the kind of intergenerational social and cultural capital that can go into supporting kind of providing the support for what it means to kind of navigate the financial gauntlet of graduate school. There are different ways to secure funding, but we're not taught that. And oftentimes that's a kind of knowledge that I think is handed down or passed down by folks who have been given access to these spaces in the past. And so there are a number of factors that I think come together to kind of like really disproportionately impact Black graduate students in terms of funding and the financial component of graduate school. So I'll give one quick example and then I'll kind of move on. Is I'm at a point now, and I think Marlon is at a similar space where I'm at the end of my formal training. So I'm in year 6 of my PhD and I'm finishing my doctoral internship, which is a clinical internship. And then I will be in the liminal space where I need to get postdoctoral hours, clinical hours, in order to get licensed. Now that process, even though I'm objectively on paper in a well-positioned, the funding for postdocs, no matter where you are, is below a living wage essentially, and you have to navigate this process in order to get licensed. It's not something that you can forego unless you don't want to be a licensed psychologist. And so the only reason that I'm able to really absorb this cost is because, as a mixed Black person, on my dad's side of the family, there is more intergenerational wealth. Even though on my mom's side of the family, upwardly mobile, middle-class Black family from Contra Costa County, still what it means to have intergenerational wealth is on a completely different scale. And so I'm able at the end of the day, have one person, my grandmother here, and say, hey, look, this is crazy and nobody prepared me for this. Can you support me in the short term? And I'm able to get a no interest loan for, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it needs to be. And so that's something that I would not necessarily be able to advise other graduate students who are coming down this road that they're going to be able to be funded or resourced enough to make it through these different expectations. And we're not taught that along the way. So that's sort of where the underpaid piece came from. And I'll keep it brief, but the unafraid piece is just, if you look historically, Black graduate students have been at the forefront of critical movements toward racial justice, towards social movement, toward these kind of like progressive outcomes that are really rooted in social justice values and what it really means to move toward equity and inclusion and these values that are fundamentally American. And so regardless of these things, that these barriers, these kinds of concrete, practical barriers, these barriers in terms of just being recognized and uplifted, Black graduate students have still been unafraid to lead the charge and be at the forefront of these movements and really be thought leaders in spaces of change and kind of liberation. So I think those pieces just kind of encapsulate a lot of what it means to be Black and be a graduate student. And so that's where we landed.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nolan. Tashara, I think you might be muted. We still can't hear you. Okay. Well, while Tashara is getting her audio together, say something again and see if we can hear you now. No, we can see your lips moving. It's okay. I can go ahead and ask the next question. So you mentioned a lot about like being unafraid and how that had a lot to do, like just feeling like you need to be bold as a Black graduate student. And I'm wondering, because while me and Tashara were writing our chapter, at the forefront, we always thought about like, what is it that we want people to take away from our chapter? What is it that we want people to feel when they are reading our chapter? And so when we were writing, we always thought about the quote by Maya Angelou, where she said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And we really wanted the readers to feel our experiences and to be able to put themselves in our book chapter. And so I'm wondering for you all, what was at the forefront when you were writing your book chapter?
Yeah, so I can start off by answering this question. So what was really at the forefront for, I mean, a lot of us, there's 4 of us who contributed on this chapter, was, experiencing all the things that we're writing about. So, we're writing about some historical elements and we're writing about some of our hopes for the future. But a large part of this is we're in the thick of it while also writing about this. And so a lot of what, was at the forefront of for me was emotion and, what I had hoped, someone had told me before I entered my program, or just the little nuggets that I had learned along the way that I felt like someone else really needs to hear. So I really wanted to, convey that emotion, but also to provide some validation for other students that like these are things that it can feel really isolating to experience. But in fact, like there's a whole network of people who are experiencing being underpaid and under-resourced and, just not heard or valued or appreciated. And so really, keeping my experience with that at the forefront, as well as thinking about, helping someone else through these things and maybe not having to experience them in such a hard way like a lot of us had to.
Yeah, I will. I'll jump in on that and just kind of give my real quick. Just appreciate y'all having us here. So for me, one of the things at the forefront was how do I acknowledge kind of a spectrum of, hey, there are these issues that exist, but then there's also this long history of Black graduate students who have come before us, who have been kind of like, hammering at the wall to try to make these things better. And so at the forefront of my mind was, how do I acknowledge that we are not starting on the ground floor, but there's still a ways to go. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of like lay out, in the initial part of the chapter, like, hey, these are some of the things that Black graduate students experience today. And then these are some of the ways where, older Black graduate students, like the shoulders that we stand upon, have like raised us and pushed us forward And then at the end, kind of acknowledge like, oh, here's maybe like the next direction that we want to move, or here is where we're going to find the resiliency that's so important if you're going to be able to like keep going, if you're going to be able to keep like hammering at the wall that, is, not broken, but is also like far more damaged because of how much work people have put into kind of creating spaces for Black graduate students to live their life and succeed in higher education. And so that for me was just one of the things that I was thinking about, is like laying that out, but also telling a story, telling a narrative of like, where we are and how we got there from those who came before us.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and just really talking more about the writing process. And Shaina, your comment about like thinking through what are some of the nuggets I wish someone had told me before I had got into graduate school is so important, because I feel like I hear that a lot from graduate students, where their perception before they enter grad school is a lot different once they go through it and they're done with it. And they're like, some things are a little different than I expected. And so that kind of leads to my next question, because the book is all about making Black Lives Matter, and it really focuses on anti-Black environments. And so given what you all have experienced since entering graduate school, I'm wondering if your perception of what it means to be in an anti-Black space has changed, and how you would define it now that you are in grad school.
I'll jump in on this one. I think my experience with anti-Blackness and how it's changed, kind of referencing graduate school and being Black in graduate school, is anti-Blackness. I think has it's gotten a facelift. It's put on makeup. It's got new shoes and a hat and a new sweater. But the theme and the concept of anti-Blackness is still with us, right? And so I think it absolutely looks different than it has in previous decades and previous times. But I think the idea that there is still these concepts that mean that, the words of Black people and the words of Black students are regarded less, or like, it is seen as like, oh, well, you don't need that, or you don't need these spaces, or why are you complaining, or, those kind of things, like that still exist, even if, it is painted differently. And so for me, as like, I think and reflect on your question, yeah, I think the way it looks has changed, but I don't think thematically that anti-Blackness has gone anywhere.
Thank you, Marlon, for that. Can you guys hear me now? Wonderful. Okay. I definitely agree that sometimes a problem can change its face and not its appear. And that has definitely been my experience. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's very valuable to hear. My first question is, have you guys experienced any way to facilitate hope and growth within yourself, even though experiencing racialized resistance? And if so, what are some of the things that could have made you experience a more equitable or more equitable experience to your counterparts or cohorts?
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. So with my experience, and I think I have a little bit of a different experience than some of my co-authors, where, I was the co-president of the Black Graduate Student Association at UT. Small shout out, the most amazing org on campus. And I was able to find, myself in that organization, but I was also really, truly able to understand what that racialized resistance can look like amongst Black graduate students. So the thing that really gave me hope was knowing that in that resistance, I had allies in my own community. I had people who were going through the exact same thing that I was going through, I didn't need to explain, a lot of the other aspects of being Black in academia and being a Black woman in academia, because I had people there to validate those experiences. And that's in BGSA, but that's also opened so many doors into other avenues in the community where, you get hope and you get filled up from seeing other graduate students, get extra funding that they didn't know about, or to be heard, or to be connected to a mentor in which they thought that they were completely alone on campus. And so really that hope comes from, and that growth comes from just having this, this steam engine of Black graduate students all together. I think what minimizes hope and what makes us feel isolated is when we think that we're the only one. When we look around in our departments and our spaces and we think, this isn't a space for me, there's no one else here for me. And that's the truth for a lot of Black graduate students across their universities. Being able to get plugged into those networks in which you have that support and you have that validation brought so much hope for myself, and I know for other Black graduate students. And I wish, honestly, if I could change anything, I wish that I had known about it sooner. And I wish that I had been able to connect with my mentors sooner through BGSA, because I got that student connection immediately and I got that love and that validation. But there's this piece of still needing that mentorship and still having someone to kind of look back and teach you the things that you just don't know. And so while there's a lot of hope that can be said by having this large network of Black graduate students, we still are graduate students who need to be led. And so still that mentorship piece and having those Black scholars in academia and, clinically that can speak to how to make our experiences easier. I think that's the piece that we're still, kind of missing within the Black graduate community.
I really appreciate the things that you said. That's a hopeful message. And a second part that I've experienced is that sometimes as Black scholars and even Black professors or teachers, there can be an experience of feeling buried amongst your experience and all of the extra things that you have to do in order to make it, essentially. So on the other hand, I know Albert Einstein said that racism is not a problem of Blacks, it's a problem of whites. And at that time, there was serious overt racism. Sometimes what we experienced is more covert. Is there anything that you would say would have been more helpful to receive from allies or from faculty members that maybe even weren't allies? Because sometimes it's difficult to see what you're not doing when you have no idea that it's expected of you.
Yeah, I can speak briefly to this point. So, and this kind of, I think, taps into the other question about anti-Blackness and kind of how it shows up, and the ways in which it's kind of can be more covert or insidious or pervasive is, I think one thing that I've experienced that I've noticed throughout my time in graduate school is that, there really are major differences between diversity, equity, inclusion, and like decolonization. I mean, there are layers to this. And oftentimes I have noticed just in the ways that curriculum are designed, training responsibilities are delineated, and the ways in which we are asked to move through the program and learn is so fundamentally informed by white supremacy, and it's so fundamentally informed by kind of a hierarchical organization and that marginalizes different ways of knowing, different ways of being, different ways of showing up. And there is very little space to actually lift your voice and sing that message. And I've had experiences where you really want to kind of lean into some real liberation work around process and kind of invite people, leadership, faculty, staff, students, peers, into a space of honest reflection and contending with oppression, how we house the oppressor in different ways, and how the ways in which we, learn, or the ways in which we grapple with material is still fundamentally oppressive and limiting. And so one example that I think of is, like, we're counseling psychology doctoral students. And so the American Psychological Association has multicultural competencies that inform the multicultural requirements for a doctoral training program. And now it's standard to have at least one course that you have to take. And in my experience, both directly as well as peers in different programs, that course is often organized in a fundamentally kind of reductionist way that doesn't account for the intersectional experiences of living in a racialized world, a racialized society, and what that means, and really kind of engaging in process that's a community process to focus on that. Rather, it's a didactic, top-down kind of, let's talk about these concepts from an overly psychologized and detached place. And I think that I have noticed that when I've tried to uplift my voice, even at a more advanced place in the program, with some support and some, strong connections made, that my voice, when I'm really sort of pushing up against the framework around which the program is structured, is very quickly marginalized. And there's almost kind of a, speak softly but carry a big stick kind of quality of, like, you're gonna, you should tread lightly here, and you should really think about what you're saying and what you're suggesting, because we're not really about that. We're trying to check boxes here, and you're doing too much. And so that experience for me has both highlighted the ways in which anti-Blackness can dress up in different, just as Marlon said, it can have different clothing, different apparel, but it's insidious, pervasive, it's in the soil. And oftentimes real allyship, I think, looks like understanding that, sitting with that, and creating space to really push back against that.
That's wonderful. And you really speak to my experiences as well with that. And you bravely answered that question, because, as you said, sometimes it is that the voices that we have are just not quite welcome. Our experiences aren't quite welcome, or perhaps that's my experience. But I think that there are many people out there that experience the same thing as well. Keoshia, I think I'll take this next question and then I'll hand it back to you, if you don't mind.
I think Shaina wanted to make one comment.
Oh, yes, Shaina, please.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So just a quick comment to what Nolan was talking about. And, this idea of we're checking off boxes and we're doing the things that we need to do in order to say that we're culturally competent or that we're social justice oriented. And really thinking about the ramifications of not following through on that on the part of, like, the administrator and the university, and thinking about Black graduate students and how we bear the brunt of that ramification. So when we have this institution and this organization that says that they're about something that in practice they're not about, that leaves the real work to be put onto Black graduate students. There's this cultural tax that we talk about a lot in the Black graduate community of just, like, we see this work that needs to be done, and the people who are supposed to be doing it, the people who we're relying to do it, aren't doing it. And so it falls on us, or else. And the or else is our mental health, our physical health, our intention to persist, our feelings of imposterism. We put all of that back on ourselves. And so when we don't have, a good place to receive that support, and when we're advocating for our needs and we're told that, oh, we're doing everything that we can, a lot of times that means that we look to ourselves for solutions, we look to ourselves for answers, and we also look to ourselves for some of that blame, which is where kind of that imposterism comes in, which, am I good enough? Am I even supposed to be in this space? If this space is supposed to be multicultural and social justice oriented, and I'm still not fitting in here, where does that leave me as a Black graduate student? And I think that's the experience of so many of us. And that also plays into why our attrition rates are higher than they really should be, and why our enrollment and recruitment rates are lower than they should be. And so it really is this like just culmination of things that can really play into the physical and mental health of Black graduate students. And I don't think that is said enough. And I don't think there's even a lot of Black graduate students who have the words or have the avenue or the platform to say those things.
Thank you for that, because it is insidious. I know Keoshia and I write about it in our chapter, some of our experiences, and that's just really the tip of the iceberg. And I know that we aren't the only people to experience these literal trauma as we navigate graduate school. And I think it's important to state bluntly that they exist, and that something has to be done. And it's not just on us to do it. We have to dig up that soil, till it, put new nutrients into it, because you can't grow nutritious things in dead soil. Thank you so much, all of you, for those answers. So now here comes some fun. What's the main takeaway you want your audience and readers to have from this interview and from your chapter? Sometimes we don't get to say that as authors. We write the end of our chapter and here's where we go from here. But what really is the takeaway? And anyone can take that question.
I can start. I think, the way that we formulated this chapter was very community, right? So it was certain of us were going to have a particular experience that made them, particularly, salient when, okay, we have this section on this, like, oh gosh, like that's your wheelhouse, And so I think while there are these huge chapter, this big picture takeaways, I also want each of them to contribute here, because I know that there were very personal things that they wanted. And so I'll talk about one of the very personal things that I wanted. And that was to kind of bridge this gap of there is a problem, but the people who are enduring that problem are not helpless. Right. And so, for example, our program didn't guarantee funding. And so when I first came in, there was a student who was an older student in our lab, and he said, gosh, I know this person who's handing out a TA-ship. You should email him. I think you'd be good for it. And that was how I learned the whole process of how I was going to get my graduate school paid for. And if he didn't do that, I wouldn't have known. And so it was literally somebody who was looking out for me, who said, I understand that there's a problem here. And so I want to make sure that you have a heads up on how to address that. And for me, this chapter was a little bit of a shout out to him, a little bit of a shout out to hey, thank you for being that person who stepped in and said, hey, I see these problems. I'm gonna give you, insight into how to address them. And I think for me, that's what I wanted to do as well. I knew that there was an issue that I didn't know how to do certain things. I didn't know what was expected in even academic writing or things like that. And so one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that I sat down with people and say, hey, these are the things that are expected. And I knew that that was going to take hours, and I knew that it was going to be tough, and I knew that it was going to be a difficult process. But at the same time, you can't write a chapter about, hey, we take care of ourselves, and then not not actually take care of the people who are under you. And so this, for me, my takeaway really was that, or the thing I wanted people to take away really was that, there is a foundation of Black graduate students addressing these problems, and we are standing very firm on that foundation, and we're continuing to push, and we're continuing to climb up those stairs and push that forward in the big picture, right? In the big picture, the institution-wise, saying hey, like you have to take care of graduate students, you have to, right, as a whole, and on the individual level where it's just somebody saying, hey, you can do this and it's hard and I want to help you on an individual level. So those were the important takeaways for me. I also want Shaina and Nolan to contribute here as well.
Yeah, I can go next. So for me, I have two main takeaways. The first one is whatever university you're at, get plugged in with your Black graduate student network. If you don't have one, find that mentor, find that other Black graduate student, and create that space for yourself. I think that me finding the Black Graduate Student Association at UT made the difference in my experience. And it made the difference in my feelings of isolation and understanding that I do have some power here. And so I encourage, if you need that space, please reach out to that space, facilitate that space, be a part of that space, advocate for that space, because while it may not seem like a big thing, it may seem like, it's a social thing or like I don't have time for that. When you're in the thick of it and when you're, looking back on year one and you're at year 5, knowing that you have those people to carry with you and that are going to also help carry you through the program means everything. The second thing I would want someone to take away from reading our chapter and from this interview is that you have more power than the powers that we want you to believe you have. You have more power. Like there is so much that it's easy for as Black graduate students to see that, in a lot of ways we don't have a lot of power, or in a lot of ways our voices are stifled. But these universities, these departments, these colleges, they actually need us. They need us more than I think a lot of times some universities are willing to admit or to say. And so using your power and using your leverage in that space to know that your Blackness and your Black intellectual property means something and it does have power, and you can use that to advocate for yourself and for funding for yourself as well. I would want someone to feel empowered to do that, because I know for me, it took to year 3, almost year 4, to truly feel like I was empowered enough to go to my colleges or go to my departments and advocate for my value and my worth. And so if anyone could do that sooner, then that would just mean that your experience is that much easier. So I would want someone to know that they have power and that they have community wherever they are. And if they don't see it, that they can facilitate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I first just want to say that this is kind of a living example of what, kind of gives me hope. This is kind of coming back to the piece about hope and resilience, and what gets you through is the fact that my immediate professional and academic family is Black community. That I'm here in this space talking about this chapter that we wrote with this community of people right here is what gives me a lot of energy, and I think to kind of extrapolate that outward to what I would hope folks can kind of take away is that there is a intergenerational movement of Black change makers and Black thought leaders who are kind of bushwhacking through the jungle of anti-Blackness and racism toward a vision of excellence and thriving and being able to center Blackness and kind of really realize this inclusive vision. And I think that oftentimes that takes extending a little bit beyond your immediate graduate school environment and immediate graduate school ecology to recognize kind of that bigger picture movement where you're situated within it. And I know that Marlon spoke a little bit to that as well. So whether that be, within your immediate university in a Black Graduate Student Association or a similar kind of student organization, or expanding outward to a network of, fellow students, scholars, researchers, just thinkers, organizers, to to locate yourself in your experience as a graduate student and kind of derive that fulfillment and support. I think that's something to reflect on and really think expansively about. And I think the last piece that I would say in terms of takeaways is to just think about time horizon. So when I say time horizon, it's like at what level of perspective are we thinking about our experiences, you know? And again, Marlon spoke to this in terms of, you know, breaking down a door or a wall that's not broken, far from it, but it's been damaged. And I think that, and again, so I'm really just riffing off of what I think Shaina and Marlon have shared so beautifully and eloquently, is that we have more power than the immediate powers that be around us would want us to know or be able to internalize. If you look at the trend lines of faculty of color, Black faculty, if you look at the trend lines of that kind of mentorship that allows up and coming students to understand kind of their negotiation power, if they're negotiating for salary or for you know, benefits or support. If you look at kind of some of the really progressive steps that are being taken to transform curricula, if you look immediately, we're still in it. We're still kind of having to bear the brunt of systems that don't reflect us, that aren't designed for us to thrive. But if you zoom out a little bit and look at the changing landscape, you notice that our representation, our influence, our voices are moving in a direction of not being sort of a tokenized exception or a box check, but something that's a real kind of insurgency for justice that I think it will ultimately transform what this experience looks like, you know, how funding is allocated, you know, how we approach the work. And so I think so that's kind of where I would land with my takeaway, is to remember that there is a larger project that we're a part of, and it's tangible to see the fruits of that project and where it's headed. And sometimes it can be liberating as well to sit in that when it can feel kind of hopeless, when you're right up close with the urgent disparities that exist kind of in the moment.
Thank you for that. I'd also like to reach out to those students who are in those really traumatized experiences where they are marginalized, they're isolated, and there maybe aren't faculty or even other graduate students that they can go to. Looking to your professional organizations was one of the things that I found helpful. Even if there's just one other person to vent to. I mean, we don't speak of the value of venting enough. And lastly, you know, we have to say, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And that means accountability on the part of faculty and the universities. And if everyone is looking to the next person to be the one to speak up and change it, then nothing changes. It's sort of like if we each take a bite of the elephant, eventually that elephant will be gone. And it might not disappear tomorrow, but looking to say, I'm just too busy, or, you know, I had this bad experience, and so I just don't want to put myself out there, is dangerous for the people coming after you. It's not that we become stagnant, we move backwards. And so thank you all for being so vocal and outspoken about a place that can really sometimes feel dangerous. And Keoshia, I think
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for responding to that question there. And Nolan, I wanted to follow up on something that you mentioned about how, and even something that Marlon kind of touched on, how anti-Blackness, it changes its sweater, it changes its face, it gets a facelift, but it's still anti-Blackness. And so as I'm thinking about the times that we're in right now, being a Black graduate student, we already have to encounter the race-related stress that we experience in our particular programs. But then in 2020, we had a big event happen where COVID came. And so now everyone is kind of Zooming into class, and school looks a lot different. And so with the pandemic happening, I'm sure that added another layer of stress that graduate students had to encounter, especially for Black graduate students. And so I wanted to ask the question of, how do you think the topics that you kind of discussed in your book chapter could be helpful to Black graduate students right now during the pandemic?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think one of the things that we talked about that may even be a kind of a like an understood but maybe new concept for people is the concept of news fatigue, and this concept that like, gosh, like news is everywhere you look, like you can't escape it, whether it's social media, whether it's the actual like traditional TV news, whether it's Twitter, like that's all news and it's there all the time. And so having to deal with that and deal with the mental health implications of there just being stuff happening all the time can almost make it impossible to rest, almost impossible to rest your mind, almost impossible to escape. And so, when we talk about that in the book, and in the chapter, book, calm down. When we talk about that in the chapter, it is, I think, something that is still important to even think about now. And that is like, hey, how do you protect yourself when those things happen? If I'm being honest, like I began, thinking about that kind of line of research after a particular video with a boy who was shot by police. His name's Tamir Rice, and I began thinking about that because I had memorized the initial set of that video, so that when I saw it on my feed, I knew to skip past it because I just knew I couldn't watch that. And even now, I know exactly where that setting is, and with other videos. Like I know, like I can tell you like the bottom sliver of the George Floyd video, because I know I need to skip that because I need to not watch that, right? And so I think like in that same vein today, like maybe it's not particularly news fatigue and maybe it's something else, but like finding out ways to protect yourself, to keep your mind, to keep your peace when things like this are happening, because being in grad school is not somehow a protective, it's not like a protective shield from the rest of the world. Like stuff that goes on in your personal life is still going to happen when you're in grad school. Stuff that goes on in the world is still going to happen in grad school, and you're going to be affected by that. I think one of the things to think about is, hey, how do you find your people and how do you hold them close? And that was one of the solutions that we kind of talked about in the book is being with your people, is finding your people, is making sure that you're taking care of you. You're taking care of your people. Your what's the word I'm looking for? Like your family, which is kind of how it has had to be. And so I think like even in times, like maybe it's not that, but like in these times, I still think it's super important to make sure that you are staying close to your family and taking care of your family. And so that's one of the things that I think about as far as like what that looks like today. And I think, in the context of how anti-Blackness has looked historically, that's what we've done. Whether it's like if you think about the sing and the civil rights movement, like that was them like, hey, how do we take care of each other, right? Like even when they were jailed, they would sing in the jail, they would feel the jail with these like spirituals, feel the jail. And that's like, even though we're apart, how do we make sure that the family knows that we're here together? And I think, we're still, I mean, I can't sing, but we're still finding ways to symbolically say like, hey, I'm here with you and I want to be with you, even though like the pandemic has meant we've had to be apart. And so, I guess to summarize, which, good luck, to summarize, I would say, yeah, one of the things I think to take and to keep and to move into like what we do now is keep your family close and figure out how to hold on to them well.
Yeah, and I want to just like kind of double down on what you're saying, Marlon, is like family in our community means so much. And, to highlight what you're asking, Q, the pandemic made that exponentially harder to tap into. So we have this like pandemic that's isolating us from all parts of society in a space as a Black graduate student where you already feel isolated, in many places in a country where you also don't feel safe walking outside of your house. So all of that isolation just compounds, and it becomes that much more difficult to even, try to find community or even envision a spot for you in a community. But that is also like a catch-22 because it makes it that much more important to find that space, because you are so isolated on so many layers. And, like Marlon said, life is still happening, but it feels like it's kind of happening while you're in a bubble and you're just watching things go around you, but you're still being penetrated by all of it. And so it becomes really difficult to maintain your mental and your physical health in this isolation of like, I can't go to the places that feed me. I can't go to my spiritual centers that give me life. I can't connect with my friends, or if there is another Black person, I wouldn't know because we're on Zoom all the time. And so it becomes so much more important for us to find the community that will fill us up. And that's why I love that we even have this space today, because that is a representation of how we're still trying to sing to each other, how we're still trying to connect with each other, even though there's all of these barriers in place trying to prevent that from happening. And so I would just like completely agree with you, Marlon, and double down on that like finding that community, whatever that looks like, whether that's over Zoom or whether that is in a socially distant space, is so important, especially right now.
If you don't mind, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I had to disconnect that. Okay, so Shaina brought up so many good things, so did you, Marlon, but it made me think about where we've come as Black people over the years. We started out wading in the water, and then we went to the civil rights movement, and it was I'm Black and I'm proud. And then somewhere along the line, things got kind of quiet. Even though advocacy was still taking place, the shape of advocacy is changing. Where do you see us as Black students, graduate students? We're leading those numbers and that research that changes policy. Our advocacy is not any less important than other types of advocacy. Where do you see us going as Black graduate students in the future?
I can jump in here, but I encourage my co-authors to if you have anything to add, please. There's a lot of different ways I see us going, but the main thing that comes to mind when you're speaking is, where we've been isn't going to get us where we need to go. And so what I would hope for in the future is that we, and Nolan spoke to this a little bit, but that we don't rely on these systems that weren't built for us in the first place, that we try to create and cultivate something new for ourselves that are actually in line with what we're needing right now and what we see as value in our education and our existence. And so, thinking about the future, it becomes really difficult to disentangle that from all of the past, oppression, but also the past wins that we've had. And I think it can be really challenging to do that when we do see so many successes from our past, and we do see these movements that have garnered, significant support and that have made some tangible changes in our communities. But that's not to say that there's still these gaping holes that exist in what it means to be Black and what it means to be a Black graduate student. And so I would just hope in the future that spaces like this continue, but also are amplified in order for us to start, dismantling and doing away with these systems and these paradigms and these ways of thinking that don't serve us anymore and that don't reflect where we are as Black graduate students.
You better speak on it. Marlon, I saw you smiling.
Yeah, I'm smiling because one, I was just sure Nolan was going to hop in on this one. But also I'm smiling because I think I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope in what Shaina just described, but I also have a lot of hope because, I think it's a both and. I think yes, we're going to have to do some stuff that's outside the system. We're going to have to make sure that we're creating our own systems. And then I also think it's going to have to be like, hey, we need to make the issues that are in the system so blaring. And that's a strategy that actually comes from the civil rights movement, right? So, you know, the ideas of lynching, the ideas of like, you know, beating Black people for being Black or trying to vote, or, you know, these kind of particular things, like, it wasn't that we said, hey, you know, stop doing that, and they were like, all right, cool. What happened is we put a camera on it and we said, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it in the middle of the day, and we're going to, you know, we're going to dare you to beat us in the middle of camera, and like the whole world look at it and pretend like it's not a real thing or it's not happening on your street. And so I think one of the excellent things about, you know, supporting each other through a process like getting a PhD or getting a you know, increasing high, you know, Black students and people of color in higher education is, hey, at some point, yeah, there are people who are working within the system to say, hey, we're going to make this so obvious that you have to change this, that you have to do something about it. And so yeah, I have a lot of hope because, you know, and I'll shout out our advisor here. We are creating families of researchers who are doing that work, who are making it so that when you look up something, you know, when you type in, you know, race and racism, when you type in, you know, those in your university library thing, like research comes up that'll help you make the arguments that are really important for us today. And so I think it's both and. I think it's like, hey, you know, we gotta tear up the system from within, and we have to create our own systems. And the reason I say both and is because, you know, sometimes life doesn't allow you to only work within the system that you created on your own because you didn't like the other system. And one of my, you know, the biggest example I would say is the, you know, justice system, if you will. Like sometimes it doesn't allow you to work outside of it. And so we have to say like, hey, we're going to make it so blaring that this is not okay. We're going to make it so blaring that this is unjust that you have to do something about it. But yeah, I have a lot of hope because of, you know, the progress that we've seen so far, but also because, you know, we're bringing up people. That sounds like I'm like having children, but I think we're, you know, we're increasing, you know, the people who are doing this work, who care about it, who want to like lay a foundation and keep building.
So I'll just say quickly, because I was, you know, thinking with the question like, wow, you know, this is something that there's a lot of energy behind that question and reflecting on that for me. And to be honest, what I'm sitting with now though is how filled up I feel to be this much on the same page with, you know, my co-conspirators and confidants and partners in crime here, because what Shaina and Marlon just articulated and kind of felt into so beautifully is really speaks a lot to kind of how I think about these things, and kind of what comes up for me just in terms of mentorship and in terms of just that kind of widening funnel over time of the intergenerational kind of project that this is, and that having one step, one foot. You know, we have, Marlon mentioned our advisor, Kevin Coakley. He wrote a paper. It's called "In Defense of the Master's Tools," which is a play on, you know, Audre Lorde. And it's basically an argument for quantitative methods, and saying that, you know, quantitative methods in and of themselves are not evil, and that we can reclaim kind of this epistemology to do the work. And I think sort of in that same spirit, having one foot in systems that we've inherited that are deeply flawed, but being able to retool and reorganize and reconstitute them while having a foot out of that system to really to have kind of a radical hope and a radical vision for new ways of doing things is an incredible balance to strike. And I see my family and my community, academic, professional, beyond, doing that and engaged in that process. And what I imagine, for Black graduate students as time goes on is just to continue to kind of straddle that line and just in greater number. And so I just kind of want to echo what they shared and just say that really speaks to my heart as well, and how I see our power and what we do and what we will continue to do.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. African proverb that speaks to, I think, all of our journeys. This is the success that we'll have. It'll be together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I definitely want to point out that basically the two themes that kind of came up as I was hearing you all kind of talk about advocacy is that, one, it requires accountability on the part of the people who are doing these acts to Black graduate students, or putting Black graduate students in situations to where they are experiencing a lot of distress. And then the second part I heard, which Nolan really highlighted, was that it takes energy. And so we definitely want people to know, who are watching, hear this interview, that it is not easy. It is not an easy journey, but it is doable. But at the forefront, I really want to come back to what Shaina had mentioned. It does, you definitely need to prioritize your mental health, because it does take a lot of energy to make changes in a system that was not meant for you. And so I do want to end the interview on a highlight. Oh, go ahead, Marlon.
I was gonna essentially co-sign.
Okay.
I was gonna co-sign for sure. I also want to acknowledge that sometimes what seems like failure is not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you're, to use this extended metaphor, if you're banging against the wall and you're trying to knock it down and you get to a point where you're like, this isn't working. You didn't fail here. You're part of, no one described this, you're part of a big, and what that means is that sometimes you're knocking the wall down and afterwards you get to rest, and we just get to honor who you are and honor what you did. And so I want to respect that. I want you to take care of your mental health. It's something that, I really wish we had reiterated in the chapter better, is that I want you to knock down that wall, but then take care of your mental health and rest and know that you did your part.
Thank you for that, Marlon, for sure. You're muted, Dr. Ife.
I'm just talking and can't none of y'all hear me. I just wanted to jump in. This has been such a rich conversation. As I've just been listening, I have been filled. I've been getting texts and stuff and people commenting. So thank you for each of you for just being brave and just sharing your experiences. Because I know that one of the things that we don't necessarily talk about is that you really put yourself at risk when you're speaking up as a graduate student. You have a lot of power, was said earlier, but at the same time, there are people that don't want you to talk. They just want you to be happy Blackies, and that doesn't go over well when you speak up for yourself. So for each of you, I want to say thank you. Nolan, I know you got to get off because, as a psychologist, we work on that 50-minute hour. So everything is but I do want to give you guys a chance to say a shout out to Dr. Kevin Copley. I heard him mentioned earlier, but I do think it's important for all of y'all to say, what's up to him, because he's the one that has really pulled all of us together.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Kevin Copley, Jegna. This was an amazing experience and an opportunity, because Black graduate students' voices are typically not heard, and this was an amazing way for us to get heard and to start the conversation.
Yeah. So if you guys haven't seen it already, Nolan, I know you got to go. If you haven't seen it already, if you have not gotten a copy, the book that we are talking about, each of us has written a chapter. So everyone that you see and then everyone that you'll see in the whole series for the entire year, the book is called Making Black Lives Matter, Confronting Anti-Black Racism. You see all of us have our copy. You can even get the book free, an electronic copy free online. I am going to put it in the chat. So if you are interested in being able to talk about confronting anti-Blackness, I want to encourage you to definitely read the book. I want to encourage you, if you are interested in this series and talking about how do you create psychological well-being, definitely consider connecting with us for the series, because the series goes on until October. So that being said, I want to thank everybody, and y'all have a good afternoon.
Thank y'all so much.